evening. How are we all? Terrific. That's excellent. My name's Carol Duncan. I'm the Public Engagement Lead from Hunter Medical Research Institute, and it's really lovely to be here to support the team who are researching male infertility here tonight, and great to see that so many of you have come along to join in as well. Before we start, I do want to acknowledge that we're meeting on the traditional land of the Awabakal and Worimi people, and to pay my respects to their leaders past and present, and it's something I try to be conscious of every day, just about how very lucky we are to be able to live and work and play on land as beautiful and special as we have right here in Newcastle and the Hunter. Now, tonight what we've got for you is some wonderful speakers, some of the Hunter Medical Research Institute researchers who are trying to tackle some really difficult health problems in all sorts of areas, but tonight obviously being male infertility. And they are part of the Hunter Medical Research team, which is around 1,700 researchers strong. HMRI is the largest independent regional medical research institute in Australia. So really quite a significant organisation. And if you've never been up to visit us at the building at New Lambton Heights, we're in behind the hospital, right next to where the brand new acute services building is being constructed at the moment. And gosh, is it enormous. It is huge. But we are really lucky to work on such beautiful land as that as well, because we are surrounded by bushland and a bypass. But anyway, surrounded by bushland. The bypass is going to be great. Anybody from HMRI can tell you just at the moment how long it can take some afternoons to leave the premises. Professor Aitken is nodding in wise agreement. You've felt the pain, haven't you? You've felt the pain. Now, we've got wonderful presenters for you tonight. We've got some special guests as well talking about their areas of expertise and personal experience. And we'll have a QR code up on the screen later, because we'll do a Q&A at the end of the night. And we really, if you've got any questions at all, don't worry if they seem silly, because heaven knows when I was on the ABC, I asked Professor Aitken millions of silly questions on a regular basis, and he always took it in the very best spirit. But if you are feeling self-conscious about a question that you might want to have, we will have a QR code for a Slido, and you can pop your questions up anonymously. Okay, so don't feel that you will be able that you will have to leave here at the end of tonight's forum without having asked the questions that maybe are of concern to you, that maybe you feel self-conscious or embarrassed about, because we got you, and we'll be able to look after you. I do want to introduce Professor John Aitken, who is the Emeritus Professor John Aitken. We were just discussing how that means that people like John actually never get to retire, because the work that they have done is so special. People keep asking them to come and help and to ask for their advice. And I think you're heading off to Brazil shortly. Fantastic. Will you please come and open our night for us? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Carol. And again, great to see so many people here. My task right now is just to welcome you on behalf of the Royal Society of New South Wales. The Royal Society was founded in 1821. It's the oldest such learned society in Australia. And it exists really to recognise and promote excellence in science and the arts and literature and humanities. And one of the things that I very much hope is it does that through promoting this kind of public forum where you can engage in informed debate on the topics of the day. In 2019, Eugenie Lumbers, who's sitting in the audience, founded the Hunter branch of the Royal Society of New South Wales, so that whatever debates we have, we can make sure that those debates resonate with the local communities. And in that role, we organise 4 or 5 public fora like this every year. And you are all very welcome to join the Royal Society of New South Wales. I don't have any flyers, unfortunately, but if you just go to the website, you'll see how easy it is to become a member of the Royal Society or a fellow of the Royal Society and join the conversation. So a very warm welcome from the Royal Society of New South Wales, and I know we are going to have a fantastic evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Now, tonight is being filmed and photographed for HMRI and for the research team. Once again, if you are self-conscious, if you don't wish to appear in any of that, please let me or our photographer Mick know so that we can ensure that your privacy is respected in that area. I love working at HMRI because I've always, I think, had an curious, inquisitive nature, and I get to hang out with people who are trying to answer questions. And a few weeks ago, I took our dementia research team up to Maitland Regional Art Gallery for a public forum just like this, and along with Maple, our MRI therapy dog as well. Maple is beautiful. Maple helps accompany people who might be anxious about coming into the MRI machine at HMRI because, you know, they're noisy. They don't just go ping, they go bang. And Maple is beautiful. He is the most wonderful, well-behaved and obedient dog who will do anything for a cuddle and loves his Berry Mary toy too. But to be able to actually take people from HMRI and the University of Newcastle out to talk to community, as John was saying, is incredibly important. We actually have reasonably poor health literacy in our region because our region is so diverse. The Hunter New England Health Region covers from Newcastle to the Queensland border, so there's 1 million people in that region, and our CEO likes to say, Carol, your job is to go and have 1 million cups of tea. Each of those people need to know about us. So the more that we're able to have these sort of conversations and give you the chance to chat to people, the better. We wrapped up our Maitland event because the gallery has a wonderful program that they've run for about 10 years called Art and Dementia, which probably makes sense to a lot of you. But at the end of that, we were still there for maybe 45 minutes or so with cake and come on in. Cake and cups of tea, and again they had the opportunity to ask the people who are doing the research the questions face to face. And that's just incredibly valuable, both for you as an individual if you've got questions, but also for the researchers because they get to hear from you the things that you are actually concerned about or interested in. So I would like to introduce our speakers tonight from HMRI and the University of Newcastle, John Schjenken, who is the Director of HMRI's Infertility and Reproduction Research Program. He'll be our first speaker for you tonight with their presentations. Elizabeth Torres-Arce, who is a PhD candidate who's joining us tonight too, talking about the journey of the sperm from the site of production in the testes to the egg. Aleona Swegen, translation of our reproductive science to the world. And Aleona recently was the recipient of an Innovators Award at HMRI, which will enable her to continue really digging deeply into this area of work that she's looking at with what is called Sperm Safe. And Nathan Burke, postdoctoral research fellow, who is looking at male fertility as a biomarker of lifelong health. So without further ado, I will hand over to John Schjenken. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol. And thank you everyone for coming along today. I think it's fantastic to see such a broad audience here. And I guess from my perspective, if we can leave or finish today and people can go home and talk more about male infertility, then we've really achieved what we're setting out to achieve. I was also given 5 minutes and I think I'm going to go over, but anyway, we'll deal with that. So I think if you log onto social media these days, often you'll see beautiful photos like this of a happy family all together, having a great experience. And often I think society kind of forces us to share these amazing moments and we're less willing to share some more challenging moments. And I guess that's what we're here about today, to really start to open these conversations. And they have that saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but in reality, a picture is a static moment. Okay, it's just one moment in time and we don't know the journey that this family here have taken to get here today, or in this image. So maybe mum or dad had problems with their fertility. Maybe the children had to be born through assisted reproductive technologies. Maybe even one of the children was born too soon and had to spend the first few months in a neonatal intensive care unit. And I guess that's really what today is about, to highlight that we need to talk about this more and we need to share these challenges and be more open about the issues that we face. And today, of course, we're focusing on infertility. And I think this audience might appreciate this a little, but infertility is really recognised as a global public health issue. And when you look at the statistics, if you don't completely understand or don't completely appreciate them, it's incredible the prevalence of infertility in our world. Around 15% of reproductive aged couples will have problems with their fertility, and I always like to put that into a number because I think that makes it even more confronting. 186 million people worldwide. That's about 7 times the population of Australia. That's a huge number of people. And not all of these individuals are fortunate to have the access to healthcare and the support in psychology and other things that are required for these individuals as we do in Australia. If we zoom into Australia and we focus on us, we are indeed not immune to these problems. Around 1 in 6 couples will have problems with their infertility. And in 2023, looking at the statistics, around 6.3% of all the births in the country were or involved the use of some form of assisted reproductive technologies. That's almost 2 children in every single classroom have been conceived through ART. So it's not something that is going away, and in fact, as John will probably talk about later on, it's becoming more and more prevalent, something that we really need to be aware of. So for a long time, infertility was a woman's problem. It was something that really was a female-centric problem. But the simple reality is that infertility spans the breadth of both women and men. And that burden, while it did disproportionately rest with females, infertility does affect males. It's affecting around 12% of the population, and it's the cause of a couple's failure to conceive in around half of the cases. So male infertility is a big problem, and it's something that we in our research program are really focused on trying to address. So if a couple go to a clinic and they may potentially have some problems with male infertility, some of the more obvious things to look at are the sperm, as you probably appreciate. So whether there's the right number of sperm, whether they move properly, or whether they have the right shape, if they're shaped in that correct way, that can potentially inform the clinicians as to whether or not these individuals may have problems with their fertility. But these aren't the only factors, and Elizabeth will touch a little bit on some other interesting work that we're doing in this space. Now, the cause of this infertility can be incredibly varied. We'll hear a little bit about how genetic factors can influence our fertility. I think very concerningly, given the world that we live in, our lifestyle and the environment in which we're exposed to can influence our fertility. So things like diet, things like our climate, pollution and stress, which we're all under. I was under stress about 5 minutes ago before I got up here, really can influence our fertility and our capacity to produce these healthy, happy sperm. Medical treatments have made an incredible advance on society and have led to terminal conditions now being something that people can live beyond. And if we talk about testicular cancer as an example, the survival rates are now incredible, more than 80%. But the treatments that we're providing to these children that are allowing them to live happy, long lives can have a net consequence. And for boys, there is a 50% chance of permanent fertility loss. So you might be thinking, well, we know if there's not enough sperm, if they're not moving properly, if maybe they're not shaped correctly, that's the problems with fertility. So maybe it's all solved. But I saw this bit of information when I was researching this talk, and I thought it was really profound. This was from a recent report from the Australian-New Zealand Assisted Reproductive Group, and it showed that the principal cause of male infertility was unexplained in the majority of cases. So the majority of the time we might be able to recognise that they don't have enough sperm, but we don't know why. And I think this really emphasises why research and the work of clinicians and amazing people out there is so fundamentally important to help us understand this. So really this is what we're here to do, the Infertility and Reproduction Research Program, understanding what could be causing infertility in these males. And what we want to do is we're aiming to identify factors that impact male reproductive health and harness this knowledge to develop safe, effective strategies that will improve fertility and the health of future generations. And the way we're going about this is really to use fundamental biological knowledge, and I'll provide an example of how this can really be applied in a few slides, to understand what creates the best sperm. And by understanding this, we can identify simple and effective interventions that could potentially improve reproductive health. We can also identify, using this approach, treatments that can potentially improve reproductive health for couples and allow people to conceive naturally. And for those individuals that may not be able to conceive naturally, we can, and we have, in fact, developed technologies that can really make a difference in the clinic. This is a beautiful story that John will no doubt touch on later on. This is what we call a bench-to-bedside story, fundamental biological knowledge that started more than 25 years ago that has led to the development of a device that can select good quality sperm, or the best quality sperm. And this device has now reached the end of clinical trials, and I think next year will likely be starting to enter the clinic. So some really amazing evidence of how some researchers within the University of Newcastle have really driven this. So to finish off, I'd like to go back to this image and just really highlight that I think having these conversations are really important, and sharing this knowledge and hearing from the amazing researchers that we're going to hear from over the course of today, and all of the people that are a part of this panel will be incredibly important, and hopefully you guys will go away and appreciate the prevalence and the challenges that we face in infertility and have a new appreciation for the work that's done at HMRI. So with that, I will hand it back over to Carol, and thank you.
Dr. John Schjenken, thank you very, very much. And we do have a host of terrific tales for you in this research tonight. And as John was just pointing out there, that enormous number of infertility in males that is unexplained. And I think perhaps your next speaker is going to try and shed a little bit of light on that for you. It was just one of the many pieces of the male infertility puzzle. Elizabeth Torres-Arce, thank you.
Thank you. Well, yes, today I'm here to tell you a little bit about the journey of sperm, how things like biology, your age, and then everything that the male is exposed to in the environment can help shape male fertility. And the first, well, you know about male fertility, you know about sperm. I think that's a very normal thing that we all know about. You're probably familiar that this happens in the testes, spermatogenesis, this process through which we create sperm. But what you might not know is that when the sperm exit the testes, they're still not ready to do their job. They still need to do an extra step, which happens in a different part of the body called the epididymis. And it is in this region that sperm actually become competent and capable of doing their job, which is reaching the egg. This whole process takes 72 to 74 days. And unfortunately, not all sperm are born equal. Some of them are better looking than other ones. And that is important because when we think about sperm, we want to ensure that we have a good sperm, which that is quite difficult because the things that we think about is the shape of sperm, the fact that they are swimming, that they're capable of swimming in a progressive way so that they can reach the egg. But sometimes sperm are not good looking, sometimes they're swimming in circles. And all of that is incredibly important so that they can do the job that they want to do, which is reaching the egg, of course. That is the objective. But now, there is more than meets the eye with spermatogenesis. Because while we can look at sperm and we can tell you how does it look, if it's moving, if it's swimming, where is it going, we can do that with a microscope. But there's a lot of things that we can look under with a microscope. There's not visible under the naked eye. And that is the case for DNA damage. DNA damage is incredibly important because if you think about it, a sperm cell has the genes that will become being half a person. So we want to make sure that whatever genes are there, they're the best possible way. But DNA damage is difficult to assess, and deciphering what a good sperm is tricky, and it's something that we're currently researching. Things that affect all of that, the environment. Anything that the male is exposed during these 72 to 74 days can shape the fate of that sperm and eventually the baby that will be born out of that sperm. Things like heat. That's one of the things that we're currently researching, how high heat can shape and change the fate of that sperm, and again, the baby. Another one is toxins. Those toxins, anything can be there, but a few of them are perhaps popular. Microplastics is all the rage. That is one of the things that we're studying. Another one is this forever chemicals, PFAS, and even wireless communication. So now, up to this point, you might think, okay, good research, but this is all bad news. And that is not the case. Because I want to talk about genes, what we have inside of those sperm, and there is good news. And the good news is in the form of epigenetics. Maybe some of you have heard of it. Epigenetics, sometimes called as gene reprogramming, means that you can tag genes, turn them on and off which is good because that means that you can change what the genes are actually doing. Things that do this, for example, age, old age can affect that. And well, you might be thinking, I can't change how old I am. So there is good news. One of them is smoking. If you stop smoking, you have the capacity to do this effect where you can change the genes. Another one, which is not going to be popular, but you know what it is, healthy diet. Healthy diet takes you a long way. So anything that is happening during these 72 to 74 days can affect the genes that we have. And there's more than just sperm. There's other contributions that the male is doing to actually the offspring. Because when we look at a semen sample, we know that there's sperm in there, but there are more things inside, some of them that have been hidden until a few years ago. One of them is seminal plasma. So the fluid that is actually surrounding those sperm cells, for a while we thought it was just a fluid so that the sperm could swim around and get to point A to point B. But we know that seminal plasma has the capacity to increase pregnancy rates to make sure that those pregnancies are healthier pregnancies. And then if we look at something novel that we're currently researching, a part of my interest, because, well, it is why I research, is seminal extracellular vesicles. So these blob-like structures, which are incredibly difficult to see, you need a microscope half the size of this room to just look at them. And we know that they are important. It's an exciting field that we're looking because it's another way that the male can be determining, the conception environment. And overall, what I want to end with is male fertility is a very complex and very important topic. There's more than sperm. There's seminal plasma. There's this exciting field with seminal extracellular vesicles. And all of this is incredibly important because what we want to do at HMRI is inform the people, give them choices so that we can ensure that whatever genes they're passing to their offspring, to their child, are the best possible version of themselves. Thank you.
Elizabeth, thank you. Goodness me, there's a lot going on there, isn't it? Wasn't it easier when it was just all the woman's fault? Oh, heavens above. So you've got the development of the sperm to the epididymis. What a great word. That epididymis is such a good word. But to continue on that thread of there's more going on there than just having good-looking sperm, but not hot sperm, just good-looking. Would you please welcome our next speaker, Dr. Aleona Swegen, who's going to tell you more about the incredible research program that she's involved in that is looking at a product called Sperm Safe.
Thank you. Okay, good evening everyone. I'm Aleona and like Carol said, I'm going to tell you a little bit about one of the many technologies that we've been working on here at Newcastle, but this one's called Sperm Safe. And it was something that we originally developed for horse breeding, but we hope that one day it's also going to help prospective parents have babies sooner and to have healthy babies. So we know that, like you've already heard tonight, infertility touches every community, with 1 in 6 couples affected by this at some stage. But like we've already heard, when we think about infertility, often the focus is on the female side, and the male contribution, the health of the sperm, historically rarely have been given the same attention, be it in medicine and research and even just conversations around the dinner table. So we really want to change that. We are now realising that sperm health plays a role in about 50% of these cases, and it's really time to give this side of the story the attention that it deserves. So that's the focus of the research in our lab. So you probably know that whether you're trying to conceive naturally or through IVF, you do need a healthy sperm and a healthy egg to conceive. But what you might be surprised to know is that the core lab processes around processing sperm that we've been using haven't really changed in the roughly 5 decades since IVF has been around. So when you go to have IVF, once the sperm sample is collected, it goes into the lab and it sits in a dish or a tube and it goes into a special liquid while it's being prepared to fertilise the egg. And so that liquid, it might not sound very important, but this is the sperm's entire environment while it's waiting for that crucial fertilisation moment. So we've taken it out of the body, we've put it in a dish, and we've taken away all of those really important support factors. And whilst this has been good enough for a long time, there's really a lot we can do, and given that only about 1 in 3 IVF cycles results in a term pregnancy, every little difference that we can make is increasing the chance of giving somebody good news on that cycle. So that's where SpermSafe comes in. It's the new generation of that liquid. It helps the sperm to not only survive in the dish, but it keeps them swimming and it protects their DNA from damage, which, like you heard before, is really important if we're going to have not just conception, but also a healthy pregnancy. And hopefully this video works. No. Okay, we had a video of some sperm swimming for you, and this was some of the work that we've been doing over the last decade in horses. I'll go to the next one. So like I mentioned, SpermSafe was something that we did develop for the horse breeding industry, and you might be thinking, well, it's already helping horse breeders achieve healthy pregnancies, but you might be thinking, what does horse breeding have to do with male infertility? And it's quite interesting to note that historically, a lot of the artificial breeding technologies did first evolve in livestock, and then they transitioned their way over into human practice. So we're hoping that we might be the next chapter in that story. And the good thing is that we've tested this technology in animals. We know that it works. We know that it's safe. And as Carol mentioned, with the support of this fantastic local organisation, Newcastle Permanent, we do have the ability to now embark on the next stage of this, which is to try to bring this to human IVF, to work with fertility clinics and patients to test this out and hopefully support them on their fertility journey. Another thing I'll note before I hop off the stage is when I do tell people that how little innovation there's been in this space, I often get the question of why is that the case? And there's a few things, like we already mentioned. There's this convention that, this traditional view that because pregnancy happens in the female body, then that's where we focus our attention, both in research and in funding. But another thing I realised when thinking about this is Newcastle really is a unique place. There are not many places in the world where we have the expertise, the ecosystem, the clinics, and all of the collaborations and resources that we need to innovate. And so, in fact, a lot of the exciting leading innovations in this space have come from Newcastle. So you can all be proud of that. We're not just a pretty coal port, but also a global leader in innovation. So I hope I can leave you with some good news that male infertility is starting to be recognised as an issue that's not just a private problem, but also a public health challenge. And hopefully tools like SpermSafe and others that we're developing are going to help make IVF more effective and support families, ultimately give more people the chance to experience parenthood. So awareness is growing, and thanks to all of you for being part of that and turning up tonight. Thank you.
Aleona, thank you so much. And I think that's something I might touch on with John Aitken in a few minutes as well, the importance of doing medical research in a regional area. And as I mentioned right at the start, there are 1 million people in our Hunter New England Health District, and marketing companies have known for decades that this is an incredible test market, which is why, not so much anymore, but for quite a few decades there, when there was something weird and unusual from overseas somewhere that turned up in your supermarket, or at KFC, for example, it's because they were testing it to see what the 1 million people in our district thought about it before they sent it out across the rest of Australia. So you've all been part of research in one way or another. This is just the latest one. Our next speaker, before we move on to our panel, is Dr. Nathan Burke, who is looking at male fertility as a biomarker of lifelong health. Thanks, Nathan.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming tonight as well. Let's just check. Okay. Now, I will present some statistics during this talk that may be a little confronting for people in the audience. So if you have any issues, feel free to either leave, feel free to chat to us afterwards, reach out to the program or a GP or specialist that you need to. The work that we do is looking at what happens after an infertility diagnosis. So if someone has had an infertility diagnosis, what does that mean for their overall health moving forwards? This journey for us, I might transition back. This journey for us really began when we did a survey of all of the literature or the publications that scientists have put out there that links male infertility with other health factors. And what we found in doing this is all of these studies that you probably can't read from there. But what we found is that no matter what the infertility diagnosis was that an individual had, when compared to a fertile population or a population with an unknown fertility status, they were at higher risk of comorbidities. That's another disease or a diagnosis of a chronic illness. I'm going to go through some of those now and show you which chronic illnesses there were. But in effect, regardless of lifestyle, education, smoking status, the infertility diagnosis meant that these individuals were at higher risk of chronic illnesses such as autoimmune disease. And what I want you to take from these slides is the disease category on the left, and on the right, the increased rate that the infertile patients saw. So in autoimmune diseases, we saw a 3 times increase in the level of autoimmune diseases that those infertile patients would have. So that means that if 1 in 1,000 men would normally suffer from an autoimmune disease, 3 in 1,000 infertile men are likely to have that. The same applies to cardiovascular disease, where infertile men were 1.5 times more likely to suffer from those. Metabolic diseases, this is things like diabetes and liver disease, infertile men were 2.5 times more likely to suffer those. And there's so many that don't fit on the screen here, but in terms of cancer, based on the different diagnoses and prognoses, infertile men were between 2 and 18 times more likely to have a cancer diagnosis following their infertility diagnosis than the general population. And I know that's a little confronting, and perhaps more confronting than that is a 2025 study, so this year, that showed that men who are severely infertile live on average 3 years shorter than the fertile population. But it's not all bad news. So I hope if you're still with me at this point, you can see how male infertility may act as a check engine light for your body, saying it's time to chat with a GP and do something. But in contrast to that, when a check engine light comes on, there's a wealth of knowledge. We know what to do, we know how to address those issues. It might be something you can address on your own. You might be able to chat to someone at the pub and get some ideas on what's wrong, how things are running. And there are specialists like mechanics. So with a check engine light, we have all of these things in place. When it comes to fertility, we don't have all of those answers yet. Sometimes people feel isolated, they're not ready to talk about these things. There's no gauge that tells you when you're running low on sperm. If there was, that's a wonderful world that we could live in, but we're not quite there yet. And if you are infertile or running low on sperm, it's not yet in policy to actually chat about those chronic illnesses that you might be at higher risk of. And that's really the space we want to move into, is taking this new knowledge that we have and affecting change clinically with it. This is in line with the National Preventative Health Strategy. This is an ambitious plan where we can move from treating chronic diseases and illnesses to treating the symptoms that come early on and hopefully preventing those chronic illnesses. In the case of infertility, that means that we might be actually able to use that as an early entryway into the pathway of this proactive healthcare system. So You get an infertility diagnosis, you chat to your GP and we say, hey, you're at risk of these things in the future. Let's make some changes now and maybe you'll never see those diseases at all. The reason for this, other than economically, is because we are all people and these are lives that we're playing with. But from an economic perspective, autoimmune diseases cost around $2 billion annually to the Australian economy. Cardiovascular diseases around 12 billion. Diabetes around 14 billion. And cancer around 18 billion. In addition to this, every 12 minutes in Australia, somebody dies of cardiovascular disease, and every 5 minutes, which is the targeted length of this talk, someone will be diagnosed with diabetes as well. That's 280 people per day. So I think you can appreciate just the impact that these chronic illnesses have on us as people, but also on the entirety of Australia, and how if we can prevent these with something like a fertility assessment, we might be able to make real change. For us as a program, we look at the links between whole body health and male infertility. And the reason we do this is because it's not the infertility causing those chronic illnesses, but it's a symptom of a greater failing of the systems within your body. And we break that down into individual systems so we can look at the individual components and then build that back up to figure out what's going wrong. So the leading systems that we're interested in are metabolism, the immune system, and genetics and lifestyle. And within the program, we specifically look at the interplay between genetics and lifestyle and the immune system. And we try to look at that in acute models. So we take cells from patients, or we look in the systems we have in the lab. And then we also look at the clinical samples. And we try to predict, based on different markers that we can identify, which individuals might be at risk of those future chronic illnesses. And we're still in the discovery phase for this, so we're still learning what is actually linking these things together. But that's where this work is heading. So what does this mean overall for an individual? Well, if you've had an infertility diagnosis, I think that you shouldn't see the bad framing of this, but you should see this as a positive opportunity to engage change. It's an opportunity for men to take some agency or control over their healthcare journey, to start a conversation with a GP about what is going on in your life that might be causing this, but also what changes you can make to prevent the future chronic illness risks that you might be facing. And one of the really important things about this is that early intervention produces improved outcomes. In some cases, it prevents the disease onset from ever occurring. And I think that's a very ideal situation. In addition to this, as we begin to understand more about the relationship between sperm production and fertility and those chronic illnesses, we can roll this out to all people in the community. It's not just a situation for men in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s and later life. It's something we can start applying from younger ages, post-puberty. We could incorporate it normally into a GP health checkup, and it can apply to all people within the community, regardless of gender and sexuality, provided they're people who produce sperm cells. So if there's a take-home message I want you to have here, it's that you shouldn't ignore the check engine light. If this comes up, it's an opportunity for you to make some change for a positive, healthy future for yourself. Thank you.
Nathan, thank you. That actually is a good news story. You worried me right at the start with the trigger warning. It was like, oh, gee, I hope no one leaves. But no, that's great. If, male infertility is the signpost that says there may be other risks for you, then your infertility could potentially save your life. So that's pretty cool. Now, does anybody need a hug? Were they triggered by that? Because, Nathan, you need a hug, Nathan. Oh, dear. We've got a wonderful panel coming up for you shortly with Professor John Aitken, Nick Allen-Ducat, who is Ducko, joining us here this evening because for quite some time now on his radio program with his beautiful host Jess, they've both been talking about infertility, and Nick in particular was talking about his experiences, and great article in the Herald this week. Thank you so much for doing that on behalf of everybody else who would never want to talk about things that are so private. I think that's one of the really tricky issues as we're talking about really private personal things, but I firmly believe that those people who have the courage to share their own stories of tragedy or triumph actually are really sharing really valuable things with us. We should not expect everybody to do that because not everybody can, but Nick can and he has, so that's awesome. Thank you very much. And Dr. Andrew Hedges, who's the Medical Director for Hunter IVF as well, who will have seen and heard just about every story when it comes to real life people coming into his practice and asking for help to actually start a family. But we do have another special message for you before that.
Dan, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. It's been great having you here. But yeah, we just wanted to ask you a few questions, get your perspective on what you think about male fertility. So the first question I've got for you is, I suppose it's an opportunity to introduce yourself and what you do, but how does your role fit into the context of male fertility or infertility?
So it fits in hugely because we have male and females, and usually that makes a baby. So the male has his part to do, the female has their part to do, and so we're 50% of that action along the way, and so it fits in heavily into the special envoy role for men's health. That does fit in a lot there, Jeff. So we need to make sure we know what we can and making sure that both male and female are doing the best they can in this area.
Yeah, right. And maybe along that line, your involvement with that special envoy, have you got any thoughts about, I suppose, the impact that male infertility might have in more general male health issues, such as like mental health, an example of something I could think of off the top of my head?
Most certainly it does, and because if we can't do what we hope to do, which is have a baby with our partner, for instance, and we go through the tests and find out that it has something to do with us, like that mental burden that weighs on you is very heavy. Also, it could be that infertility could be so many other things as well that you need to actually go get a health checkup for.
Yeah.
Like erectile dysfunction, for instance. Erectile dysfunction in men is usually masking something else.
Yeah, and like there seems to be a lot of inertia for this, maybe around young men to go and get checked, but it's kind of like there's a disconnect there for me, because the people that I've kind of talked to in university and in the field, there seems to be a lot of data, and in the public sphere, there seems to be a lot of data and a lot of sentiment that men actually want to take responsibility for their fertility. It goes without saying, they're incredibly connected to their potential offspring but at the time of conception, but they don't really appreciate their role in it. How do we make men know that their health around the time of conception is incredibly important?
I think this is one of the things that we need to really take on board as men and young men in general, is that our health is really important, because we don't always put our health first. We quite often put everything else before our health. We put the health of our partners, the health of our kids if we have them, the health of our dog, work, everything else in front before we actually look at ourselves, and we'll say, oh, should be right, we'll get
Yeah.
But men on average wait 7 days before going to see a GP when there's something wrong with them. And then 34% of men actually wait 4 weeks to actually go and see a GP. So they wait till pretty much their arm is fallen off before you're actually going to go have something looked at. So it's not just in the fertility side of things, it's in men in general that we need to get better at just looking after our health and putting a priority on our health. So because if we on average die 5 years younger than what our female counterparts and our female partners do. So, which is huge. And if you go to rural and regional Australia, and definitely remote parts of Australia, that's up to 13 years younger men are dying than what they are in a couple of cities around this country. So it's scary statistics, and these are statistics that we need to change. And for us to do that, we need a bit of a shift in our perception of what health means to us. Yeah.
Do you think, without wanting to oversimplify it, but do you think a message simply like what you said before, there's 50% of reproduction is the female, 50% is the male, and that 50% is a very significant piece of the... Do you think that message, simply that message, would be enough to get people to kind of maybe take a little bit of notice?
Most certainly. You and I are both males in this room having this conversation, right? And you're very highly educated. I'm not as highly educated, right? But it doesn't matter where our education sphere is.
Yeah.
As men, we need it definitely shortened and spoken at our level, which is 50-50. Yeah. So we just need to make short, sharp, easy things for us to comprehend and to get our heads around to be able to make a difference in this space, I think.
Oh, it's wonderful to get your feedback on that. That's very important. So before talking to us, and I know you talked to John first up, and then we met. A happy accident. I had a couple of wines. How familiar were you with male infertility before you started talking to us?
So I was a bit familiar with it before talking with you guys and John yourself as well, because one of my workmates went through it. He went through the stages of going and getting all the tests done, but all the tests got done on his part, on the female in the relationship, and so it went through so many different tests. And then he went and got his test done, and he had very, very low sperm, extremely low sperm count. Yeah, and
which is common.
Very, very common. And this is what we're saying, 50-50. If the female is going to get a test, the male should go get a test at the same time. For two reasons: you're supporting your partner and going out and doing that at the same time as her as well, because she'll be having a lot of mental anguish with that as well, and then you're going to get that test too, and that's a good supportive thing to do, so you're in it together, one team, one dream. And women are different to men, we all know that, we all have our different quirks about us, but this is one thing that we can be extremely supportive in, and get a test done at the same time as them to be able to see where an issue could be. Yeah, and then what has to be done to try and rectify that issue along the way.
Is reproductive healthcare kind of part of the discussion in the kind of wider political discussions? For example, improving regional healthcare with fertility as a focus.
In many ways, it certainly is. And my role as Men's Health Envoy is to make sure that we're putting everything on the table that are affecting men right now. So we've had a whole lot of money put into women's health in the last election. The whole reproductive cycle for men and women is extremely important. And for me, it's about going around and hearing the different stories from all different sides of this, and us putting a whole bunch of ideas on the table with the health minister and the health team, and then going through and working out what we can make as a priority and what we can do easily, what will be more of a challenge, what can be done quickly, what can be done over time. So yeah, every part of this the male health side is being looked at here right now.
And do you think, so I suppose most regional places will have slightly maybe slower access to healthcare, or maybe some technologies. For example, here in Newcastle, we haven't got the accreditation to do genetic testing for IVF, or you'll need to go to places like Sydney. Are those kind of things, realised in these political discussions that these regional centres might need a bit more investment in healthcare?
They certainly are spoken about regularly. The health minister, I can tell you, gets annoyed at myself, at Gordon Reid, at many of the other, Christy McBain as well, and all of the other rural regional members, because it's harder for us. There's no doubt about it. We can gloss over as much as we like, right? But in rural and regional Australia, it is much harder for healthcare. It's much harder for most things, because we don't live in those capital cities, and it's a distance for us to travel to get to them. So it is a hugely important part for us.
Maybe one last question, and we've kind of covered this already, but I'll give you an opportunity to maybe give me a kind of direct question. But why do you think it's important to have discussions around male infertility?
So it's important for many different reasons, but the one for me is that we need to make sure is that we need to stop going through this process of always being somebody else's fault. Always being somebody else's fault. Actually take some responsibility and check ourselves. If we can do that, A, it makes our partners much happier because they haven't just gone through this process on their own. So I do genuinely believe that we need to be taking our health into our own hands as men. And if we do that, and if we have healthy men, we have healthy women, we have healthy society, and I'm a firm believer of that. And this is just part of that process of making sure that we are healthy. Because if we do have low sperm count, there's a fair chance there's something else that needs to be looked at. So yeah, it's either a lifestyle, it's something, or there's something that we need to really be checking, and that could be causing so many other things, either right now in your life or later on in your life as you get older as well. So these are things we should be checking on.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you, Dan. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. And
cheers, Jeff. Really appreciate it. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much.
Jeff Julius chatting with the legendary Dan Repicoli over a couple of wines, as they do. Dan's amazing. I love how he just says it how it is, and I think to be able to speak so clearly and frankly to people will help them understand. We're going to have a chat with a wonderful panel now, so I'll ask Professor John Aitken to join me for a quick chat, while Dr. Andrew Hedges and Nick Allen-Ducat come and join us up here as well. Come on, Gain, you pop on this end, John, because I do just have a couple of questions, because I'm sure we're going to dig around in that a lot. But the importance, I think you're on, look at that. One of the things that Dan Repicoli was talking about there was the importance of good healthcare in the regional and rural areas. And the question that I posed earlier was about the importance of having a medical research institute like HMRI in a regional area. How do you think that fits?
Okay, so I think the first thing we all have to understand is that the problems we're dealing with are global problems. All over the world, fertility rates are falling. By the end of the century, the population of China will halve. Japan, South Korea, Australia and Northern Europe only managed to maintain their populations through immigration. So falling fertility rates is something which is globally relevant. Where we have an advantage in Newcastle is that we have spent 20 years building up a research group here that have unique expertise in studying the reproductive process. The falling fertility rates are as relevant to New South Wales as they are in the rest of the world. One of the reasons we know that something is happening to male fertility is because the rates of testicular cancer are rising all over the world. When I was a young man, nobody knew anybody who had testicular cancer. Now we all know somebody who's had testicular cancer. It's the most common cancer of young men. And it's rising faster in New South Wales than anywhere else on earth. So this local region is a little sort of microcosm for studying these very important processes. It enables us to do research which is locally focused but globally relevant.
So once again, we're the classic test market. It's what do you think? Do you posit a reason as to why that increase in testicular cancer is occurring?
Yes. Two things about it. First of all, it's a product of socioeconomic development. So as soon as a country becomes socioeconomically developed, its fertility rates start to fall, and as its fertility rates start to fall, the rates of testicular cancer go up exponentially. And we think it's something to do with modern day environments, particularly, as already been mentioned this evening, chemical pollutants within the environment having an impact on development. It doesn't affect so much the adult male, but the differentiation of the male, the development of the male in utero in the pregnant woman. That's where the cause of testicular cancer is. It's actually a disease of pregnancy in many ways, rather than a disease in the adult.
Over the first half of this year, I've spent a lot of time out in rural and regional New South Wales with HMRI doing a health pulse survey, talking to people in those areas about their major concerns. And I think one of the really important jobs that we'll have at HMRI moving forward is the research is critical. It's incredibly important, because that's how you get the answers, but to actually then take those answers and support and assistance to people, where I think the other role for HMRI is going to be advocacy to ensure that that support or access to clinical trials, access to treatments and therapies is available. I know when we were in Narrabri a few months ago and doing the survey and speaking to a few women about contraceptive choices, if they want anything like an Implanon or a Mirena, the implant or the IUD, they have to come to Maitland or Newcastle for that. It can't actually be performed for them where they live. Something that we just so much take for granted living here. So advocacy is going to be a huge amount of work. Nick, I can't call you Ducko because it just seems inappropriate in this context.
But
I do feel like your mum, because 106.9 was the radio station I came to Newcastle with 32 years ago. Yay! Hey, Mum. How do you feel when you see all that information? I mean, you are obviously, having been through this, you are miles ahead of most people now in your understanding, because you've had access to people like Andrew. But when you see some of this is confronting, as Nathan was saying.
It's overwhelming, isn't it? Cheery Thursday night. Look, it is overwhelming. I think even as someone who has gone through it, is going through it, has had fertility struggles, obviously very publicly, I learnt things just then, and I was kind of cautious about things just that I've just sort of learnt. But as you were saying, knowledge is power, and it's key in this situation. And I was fortunate in my situation, although we did it for a radio stunt, to raise awareness, but we found out that I had a problem and stuff. I was fortunate that I caught it so early, because if I didn't, it would have taken so much more time, and you don't know what else would have happened and where we would have been at in life and stuff. So, look, knowledge is power with this, and there are so many things that we can still learn about it, which is why I'm so passionate about it and sharing anything I can. I'm clearly the most unqualified person speaking tonight. It's something that's very close to my heart, and seeing what we got out of the community, doing it with Hunter IVF and Dr. Andrew Hedges here and stuff, the feedback we got from the amount of people who reached out, whether it was male or female, saying, we went and got checked. I think Hunter IVF had a real peak in guys coming in and getting checked after they found that out. And, that's all it needs to do, because as we were mentioned a few times, 50% of the problem is men, or 50% of the equation is men, and getting checked is something every guy very much knows how to do. And we've done it a lot of times in our life. It's not hard, compared to what the female sort of has to go through. So, it's overwhelming, but knowledge is power.
I've got to tell you, though, that's really gutsy, because in the years that I was working in radio, if someone said, we're just going to have someone come in and they'll test your blood pressure on air or your blood sugar, and I'd be like, no, you won't. No, you bloody well won't. You went a step further.
Yeah, we didn't expect this. I remember the phone call that Dr. Hedges gave me the night I did the test, and he was sort of like, are you sitting down kind of thing. And we had the option to pretend that it was fine and to not say it on air and say, yep, all normal, everything's fine, and deal with it in the background. But I very much wanted to be open and raw with it. And it was such an emotional time. Even thinking back, it opens wounds. But I'm so proud of the fact that I did go forward with it and did speak about it, and it did do so much, because everywhere you go, people have fertility stories, male, female, whoever it is, and a lot of people don't even speak to their families about it. A lot of people have, don't speak to their friends about it, especially. It was a gutsy thing to do, I guess, but I kind of look at it like it was a really positive impact on my life doing it, and how it sort of all played out and where we are today, I suppose.
Yeah, and the number of people that have been helped because you had the guts to do it on your show and to talk about it and reveal that most personal thing is incredibly important. So well done you. Dr. Andrew Hedges, I'm going to ask you just one question, and then I'm going to let Professor Aitken drive this panel. One of the points that was made there was that it was always the woman was investigated first. Right? And she would go through lots of tests, lots of examinations before her partner was even looked at. Is that still the case? How's that changed?
It has changed, or we've tried to make it change, but you'd be surprised how many women still come by themselves, even though we ask them to bring their partners for the first visit. I guess we're probably seeing a slightly different spectrum, because I'm a specialist, so they'll often have been to their GPs first of all and may have had some basic investigations. So they've already sort of started to approach it as a couple, but it's still seen, you can still see the guys walk into the room and they'll sit down, and you can just see how uncomfortable they are, and there's almost very little engagement. But then when you take a full history from medical history as well, and sort of get some idea that they're part of this process, I think they sort of get on board. But I probably think there would be at least 60-70% of women I see will come at their first visit with their partners now, and we investigate them concurrently. And of course, when they come back for results, it's often quite sort of blasé, but as soon as you get to the guy's sort of sperm count result, you can sort of, and you talk about it, if it's normal, you can just see the relaxation. It's like, oh, thank God for that. You know what I mean? It's they pretend like it's nothing at all, but in fact it's a really big deal. And I think there's still that difficulty of for guys thinking that they really don't want to be part of the problem, even though the message is not out there that half of the problem is either a major sperm problem or at least contributing, you know, and that message is not there. But I think the whole, what you did just made it so much more visible in society, and it made a problem which people don't talk about. It gave them a little bit of permission to talk about it, but I believe this is just so much the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. I was having a chat with one of my work colleagues through the week who was talking about he and his wife's experience of IVF, and he mentioned to me things that I had never considered in how, like, obviously we think of that process as being difficult, but he mentioned to me things that were just, had never occurred to me and are quite heartbreaking, even if ultimately it leads to a good result. So I think the more we have these conversations, the better. Professor John Aitken, I'm going to let you drive now with our wonderful panel. I'll be here to help if you need a hand, but I doubt it. But I do want to just leave you with this question. What's changed during the course of your career? And I can only imagine it is immense.
Oh, yes. So when I first started in this field, male infertility really wasn't recognised. It was something that was swept under the carpet and not really considered, and all infertility was female, and the male was just there to provide some sperm, and that was it. And what we're seeing now, I think, is a progressive emergence of a discipline. You know, if you're a woman with a reproductive problem, you'll go to a hospital and you'll be seen by an obstetrician gynecologist, someone who's trained in the dark arts of managing female reproduction, and who knows what, not only what diagnoses to give or what treatments to give. As we were hearing this evening, more than 70% of all male infertility is unexplained. There is no clinical discipline of andrology. If you are infertile in Canada or Brazil, you'll see a urologist. If you are in Australia or UK, you'll probably see an obstetrician gynecologist like Andrew. And we're very lucky to have people like Andrew in our community who do have an interest in the male side as well as the female side of reproduction. If you're in Italy, you'll go and see a physician and a specialist in endocrinology. And bizarrely, if you're in Germany or Austria, you will see a dermatologist. So there is no single clinical discipline that owns the male infertility problem. It's the male equivalent of gynecology is andrology, and it's not really recognized as a discipline. But gradually we're seeing the emergence of that. And in fact, on Monday, in the Medical Journal of Australia, we will see published the first article, which is a set of guidelines for how you diagnose and treat male infertility. So Australia is the first to come up with formal guidelines, and that's due to an organisation in Melbourne called the Healthy Male, who've actually done all the hard yards to actually put these guidelines in place. So, you know, I think things have changed really dramatically in my lifetime. And the fact that we can have a forum like this evening, where people are openly discussing the issues around male fertility is just heartwarming. And I think we are so lucky to be in this region where we do have both the research capacity and the clinical capacity to deal with this problem. As I said earlier, we'll be able to deal with this problem in the Hunter region, and what we do is going to be globally relevant because this is a problem that faces our species, not just people within our local community. Okay, having said that,
I'm just going to butt in quickly because we do have a Q&A. And we will be asking questions that you can put your hand up. We'll do that a little later on. Or if you're feeling shy, please use the QR code. That will take you through. You can pop your questions in there anonymously. Thanks, John.
So I was just going to throw it open to the floor now. I mean, you've heard basically what we've had to say. You understand what the issues are. What questions would you like to ask this panel?
Yeah, we've got a question in here. I've got a question for Nick. How much did you know about male infertility before it happened to you?
Very little, not much at all. And you quickly do learn a lot. Yeah, honestly, nothing. I didn't even know things like having your phone in your front pocket can be bad, laptop on your lap, all sorts of everyday things we do, hot, sweaty sort of environments, you know, staying in gym clothes too long. All these things are factors that I learnt with Dr. Hedges here. So, yeah, not too much.
Got a question here?
Yeah, John, question for you. The question of falling birth rates, how much of this is actually a medical problem, though, as opposed to a family planning becomes going into too late a time for pregnancy? Obviously, same-sex couples have no biological way of producing children.
Yeah, it's an archetypal, multidisciplinary problem. So the reason why fertility rates are falling is not just because we don't have the capacity to have children. A lot of it is due to choice. And in modern society, pressures are put on couples to establish themselves financially before they have a family, and often it's too late then to have children. So there are all these cultural issues that are very important. But an important component, 50% of the equation, is to do with infertility in the male. And as we've heard, most male infertility is unexplained. We don't know why the sperm counts are low, and we don't know what to do about it. So I think it's a really important area for us to study, but I wouldn't want you to go away and think that all infertility is due to the male. It's also due to a whole complex combination of economic, social, and cultural factors as well.
Nick, you talked about getting that phone call from Dr. Hedges. So you then had a lot to think about, what that actually meant for you and your wife Morgan, what that actually meant you did or did not have to do for your listeners, because I know you and Jess both take that role, you have a heap of fun, but also really seriously because it becomes a community. What were the processes that you went through? And I'd imagine that grieving is a big part of that.
Yeah, it's spot on. You're grieving for something you never had, which is like the strangest sort of thing to comprehend as well. And as you were mentioning with IVF before, speaking to your friends about it, for anyone who's been through it, if you are going through it, it's a very cruel, tricky pathway to navigate. It takes both of you to sort of get through that and how you interpret. For me, it was learning how I interpret the information differently to my partner and how certain things affect me differently to her. It was coming to terms with the fact that I had an issue. Now, mine was genetic, an AZFC deletion. Dad's chromosome didn't copy down to me, which was the part that makes sperm, which was incredibly rare. I'm pretty sure it was fairly rare.
Haven't you? That makes you special, Nick.
I was kind of, And then my wife also had a genetic issue as well, which was also fairly rare. So we were just we kind of had a laugh about it, I think, at the time when we found all these things. It was like a comedy of errors, for lack of a better phrase. But the one bit of advice that I can give to anyone who is going through IVF or has these, issues or obstacles is that there's so much news and information that's thrown at you and your faces just start to glaze over, as I'm sure Dr. Hedges has seen hundreds of times. Don't take news too well, don't take news too bad. News is just news. Just remain as steady as you can. Don't ride the highs and the lows, because that's when you sort of torture yourself a little bit. And there's so much information coming at you in a short span of time, and there's so many decisions, and there's so many, you get over one hurdle and then there's another hurdle, or there's another million different ways it could go, and so you can torture yourself so much with the what ifs and the whys, but just try and not high, not low, just remain as steady as you can, I suppose.
How did you and Morgan retain hope?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Or did you not? Did you just assume that's it?
Well, I mean, with what we had, Dr. Hedges, I remember you saying that this could be a long journey. This could be a long journey that, where that finish line ends, we might not know how that finish line. I remember you said something like that. It was how that finish line looks, or however this journey goes for you guys. It will be sort of what it will be. So I'd sort of come to terms with the fact that adoption might be on the cards, very much so, and that which is totally obviously fine, and you got to do what you got to do. But it was really hard. It's a hard thing to grapple with. It's a hard thing to go through when it's your body letting you down. If anything, I think we both kind of got through it because we both had problems. So we were like, well, we're all at the dinner party now, and just sort of had to, Yeah, I wish I had a really clear answer for that, but...
That's really interesting. That's a shared load, isn't
yes,
it?
Yeah. And so on that point, if one of you has it, because at the start, when I found out that I had the problems and my wife didn't, the guilt.
Yeah, it's all you. It's all your fault.
It sucks. And I remember apologising to her and being so embarrassed and crying so much about it. And obviously, it's not your fault. You can't do anything about it. But there was almost relief when we both had something. Now, not everyone is in that situation, but the guilt you feel when it's your body that's letting you down is, it's horrible.
Those conversations must be incredibly difficult. Does it ever get easier? I can't imagine it does.
No, but I think the thing about humans is how resilient they are, and how I guess if you're all working together for a common goal and that there is a way forward, then that's incredibly powerful as well. And I think a lot of people focus on that, and couples focus on that, and it's actually, it's obviously a very difficult space, but it's a very rewarding space as well. And I think probably the issue which we commonly see, which comes back to the fact that male infertility is so common, is that with fertility, it's almost like if you've got a really fertile female and there's a bit of subfertility on the male part, that you won't see them, in the office with fertility issues, and same with vice versa. But often what we see is not necessarily major problems, and I guess yours was probably a major problem, and Morgan's in its own right was as well. And it's just what are the odds of those two things happening at the same time? But often it's actually relatively minor problems, but it's like 1 + 1 = 6 in that situation, so that you can make some minor adjustments, and often they don't even need IVF. You address some issues, and some of the, I guess, some of the important things about the research that's conducted here in the Hunter, which in many ways has been alluded to, many of the significant advances in understanding and things like DNA damage in sperm and so on were dealt with, were pioneered here. It's a very important thing. But what that's done is helped us to translate into advice we can give people about lifestyle changes and about avoiding a whole lot of environmental toxins, things like that. And for a lot of them, they'll improve in their own accord and they'll fall pregnant spontaneously, which is fantastic. So
it's a horrible irony when you think about how much time and effort we put into not falling pregnant, right?
Yes. I mean, as John was saying, if you were a male with some relatively, not major, but even moderate problems with sperm in the early days of IVF, I'm talking about the 80s, the only option was donor sperm. That was all there was. And there were masses amount of couples who fell pregnant using donor sperm. And then somewhere around about the end of the 80s, early 90s, the process of ICSI, which we've talked about, which is where you actually put a sperm into the egg to achieve fertilisation, came about. And pretty much that revolutionised male fertility, which was fantastic. But at the same time, everyone thought it was fixed, so there was very little research that went into it after that for quite some time. And then we started to understand that there was much more to sperm than just fertilising the egg or putting a spermicide at the end and it all work, and that it's providing half of our genetic material. So if there's issues with that, there are major issues downstream. So I mean, that sort of translating that research into what happens clinically it's been a pleasure to be a part of. It's why it's so exciting. And so many, like for example, knowing about Y chromosome deletions and being able to deal with ultra small samples which might only have 4 or 5 or 6 motile sperm in the whole sample.
Yeah.
They were issues we couldn't deal with. And then adding on things like genetic testing of embryos to sort out things. These are major steps forward. And
even learning about the process of freezing individual sperm, which is something I had to do like 8 or 9 times, drive down to Sydney and give a sample and wait that afternoon to see how many we got, and got on first name basis with the scientists down there, and they'd call and say, we got 4, I was like, honey, we got 4 frozen,
Now, that was amazing to read in the article in the Herald today, that usually there are how many sperm?
15 million.
15 million.
Yeah.
And you might have 4.
Yeah, on a good day. And that they can thaw out the individual, which was just amazing. Like, they can freeze 4 and they can thaw them out and use those individual ones. So, it was incredible. I didn't know you could do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So those sorts of technologies, it's just, that's, I guess, part of the things that keep us engaged in this space, because it's these sorts of technologies that are being researched take so much time, and so many avenues probably don't really end up with outcomes that you necessarily want, but some of them do. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that it can translate into technologies we can share with patients, and it's all about better outcomes for our patients.
Yeah, as I said before, I think we're very lucky in the Hunter to have someone like you who has an interest in the male, but that's not universally the case, is it? For many obstetricians and gynecologists working in infertility services, the male is just sperm, that's all they think about. They don't think of the whole individual. And it's one of the things in the guidelines that's going to be published on Monday, is that you should treat the whole individual rather than just the gametes. But what do you think is going to be the clinical future for andrology? Do you see that becoming a subspecialty of obstetrics and gynecology, or how do you think it's going to go?
I'd like to think that most fertility specialists have an interest in andrology and can deal with it, but the reality is that that's not the case, and I think there will be just areas of excellence where there are people who have an interest in it, and that and they will probably look after more sort of some of the more difficult cases. But I'd like to think that as a whole group of specialists, that as technology moves, everyone will move with it, you know.
I think we have to just get over the ICSI barrier that you mentioned, you know.
That's
so
right.
As soon as ICSI was developed,
everything stopped.
Men just became sperm, that was it. Can I find a sperm in this ejaculate? That's all I need. And I can then inject it into the egg. And questions were no longer asked about why there's only one sperm there to inject into the egg. Yeah. But I think those days are coming to an end now, and beginning to see a resurgence of interest in trying to understand why the male is infertile, not just how to use his gametes to create an embryo.
And I think also that you know, when we're dealing with fertility and in that space, there are lots of couples who will fall pregnant with the technology that we have fairly reliably, and then we're left with a group who are really struggling, and we're not sure why that is, even though everything, you know, and for those couples there may be several barriers. On the woman's side, it might be endometriosis, or it might be other autoimmune issues. And for males, there may well be, like we now routinely check DNA damage in the sperm just to see whether, you know, that's a contributing factor. And then we work through the long list of things that could possibly be impacting the sperm for this particular guy, including all the lifestyle stuff and environmental stuff and work stuff and drugs and, you know, they're using training supplements they shouldn't be, all that sort of stuff. But frustratingly, at the end of the day, no matter what we do and no matter what supplements we give them, some of them still just have DNA damage in their sperm that we can't seem to, you know, it might vary a little bit, but we can't seem to find a reason for that. And I think that's where some of these technologies around selecting the best sperm to use really have a major role. And we've seen that move from pretty crude techniques where we just look at the sperm very carefully and and then more exotic ones where we ultra magnify it and try and work out the best shape, because, you know, the ones that have really DNA damage sort of can't fit all that material inside the head of the sperm, so they'd misshape or whatever. And now technology like you're pioneering with, you know, electrical sort of charge to try and select sperm, and other ones with microfluidics which are finding their way to the lab, and it'll be really a fascinating time to see where it finds its role. And I think that the space we're working in will be different in another 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
We do have some audience questions, Mira.
Yes, we do. We have a number of questions that have come through on Slido. So the first question, which has been upvoted to the top of the list, is does the age of the male affect fertility outcomes?
We can both answer that. You can answer that.
So very interesting. So yes, it does. So men and women are obviously different in many different ways. In women, there is a precipitous loss of fertility between the ages of 35 and 42. Fertility just disappears. In men, after the age of 35, fertility slowly subsides, but it doesn't disappear. There are well-recorded instances of men in their 90s siring children. I think the world record is a guy an Indian wrestler who was 96 when he sired his last child. But that's not the only issue. And Andrew raised a very important point about DNA damage. When we look at males, we have to understand that fertility, that is the capacity to have a baby, is only one part of the story. The health and well-being of the child that's generated is the other part of the story. And it turns out that most mutations, 70% of de novo mutations that affect our species, originate in the male, not the female. So as men get older, what you see is an exponential rise in the incidence of genetic damage in their children. So male age doesn't just affect fertility, it also affects the health and well-being of the children that are generated.
Thanks, John. So the next question that we have is for Andrew. So the question is, have you heard of men who are infertile and are more likely to... have you heard that men who are infertile are more likely to suffer chronic disease? Have you heard this before? Do you tell patients this and refer them to psychologists or GPs?
I'm interested in this.
The answer is yes, we're aware of that, and I guess there's a number of things around that. One is that some of the reasons why male sperm might be an issue, like there might be damage in sperm, is because they already have a chronic disease. So we know that things like diabetes or even obesity and other chronic illnesses it's like an inflammatory condition in the body, and we know that those things will damage the DNA in sperm. So for those people who have a history of it, then one of the things you want to do is try and optimise their general health. And so things like, we talk about obesity and weight loss, and we talk about their really good diabetic control, and for others it might be that they have chronic infections of some sort, like guys or it might be they have autoimmune diseases like Crohn's or other conditions. So for many of them, they already have it. That's the thing. And then yes, we'll involve their specialists. For others, where there might be a slight or an increased risk, even if it's twofold, it's a very difficult conversation to have. You should go and see somebody to talk about your risk of diabetes at a later age. Do you know what I mean? It's actually, so that's not a common pathway, no. But looking for evidence of those sorts of diseases is yes, absolutely.
Question. I can identify myself as Carol's colleague that, hello, how are you? That may have had good conversations with Carol. My name's Nick as well, Nick Squared in the room. We had our own journey with male infertility, but our journey started with female infertility through Janaea. I guess my question is around the fact that now we have the technologies out there and they've been around for a little while. When it comes to testing half of the problem, which is it's a 50-50, it's disappointing that that the focus is on the woman so much at that infancy. And the male test is really only how many, what do they look like, and can they swim? And in our case, we had, my wife's fallopian tubes were blocked, so we went into an IVF. Unfortunately, we had 3 early term miscarriages, and so it wasn't until that point that the question was asked, maybe there's more going on with the man. We're seeing an increase in the problems, but we're still only testing those 3 things. And it wasn't until having to travel to Sydney, again, being in a regional zone, we had to travel to Sydney and I had to do what Ducko did. And I know his name as well, he's a good bloke. But I had to do another sample and do a DNA, look at that fracturing in the DNA. How come that isn't part of the journey at the start when we're just testing those 3 things, given it's been identified as being a problem? We're not testing that at the start with a male.
All right, that one's for me. You don't need to go to Sydney to have a DNA fragmentation test. That's done, we do it routinely. I guess the question is, a lot of those tests we'll do will be absolutely normal. And it's a little bit like tests where for women, because there are tests that we don't do on everybody to look for reasons for miscarriage at the first visit. There are some that we do. For example, I'll routinely do just a normal chromosomal test, or what's called a karyotype, and that's really to look for translocations, like Morgan had, because they occur in about 1% of the population. And if there is one, and I do that up front, because you don't want to do 3 cycles of IVF and then find out that was the problem, and you could have dealt with it immediately by testing the embryos, work out which one. So that's an example of something which we do. It's not a cheap test, but fortunately it is covered by Medicare, and it costs the taxpayer maybe $200-300 each time I order one of those tests. But I think it's important enough to do that up front for both the male and the female. DNA damage, once again, it's not a cheap test, and the majority of the ones that I do come back in the relatively normal range. So it is a second line test. But in the ideal world, it would be covered by Medicare, and you would do it on everybody just to pick up that group. Even if it's just to be able to talk about lifestyle factors in a more targeted way, because there's no doubt that when you talk about lifestyle factors, it just sort of over the head, you know what I mean? It's just, that's not me. But if it's some way it's applicable to you, you pay attention. You know what I mean? So fortunately, things like smoking, for example, I'm seeing so much less smoking. But probably 5-10 years ago, every second guy I was speaking to, one of them was a smoker. And to tell them that if you do IVF and one of you smoke, it's going to almost halve your results, is a very powerful tool. And similarly, if you say to guys, if you smoke and it damages the DNA in your sperm, then that it may well have impacts on your offspring, is a very powerful tool as well. But I guess the question around, do you routinely do DNA fragmentation on sperm? And the answer is we don't routinely. I wouldn't mind doing it though, because once again, it just short circuits the process. But there are a whole host of other tests that you can do for women as well that look at things like autoimmune markers or clotting problems. And they're probably irrelevant to the majority of people that I see, but they're very important for those select few. So they tend to be second line investigations.
Can I weigh in on that one as well? Because if, I think it was Nathan who told us that 77% of all male infertility is unexplained, we don't know what test to do. That's the problem. And I have a very strong sense of deja vu. In the 1990s, I was living in London, and we set up a clinic in London devoted entirely to the male. And then it had been going for a couple of years, and I went to an important meeting in Belgium where they announced the first ICSI pregnancy. And as I was walking out the lecture theatre, Bob Edwards, who's the founding father of IVF, put his arm around my shoulder and said, "John, you know what this means? Andrology is dead. No one's going to care anymore." And that's how it's been. And the reason why 77% of all infertility, male infertility, is unexplained, is because no one was interested. All they needed to know is what you said. Is there a sperm there, and how pretty is it? They don't even care if it's motile nowadays. It's just get the sperm and stick it in an egg. But I think the other thing that we're beginning to understand, which is something I mentioned before, is it's not just about fertility. The quality of the gamete will also, the sperm cell, will also impact the health and well-being of the children. So I think that's one of the reasons why we should get on board with trying to understand this process a lot deeper, and then we can develop the sort of tests that you want to introduce into routine clinical practice.
Another audience question?
Is it right? Yeah, is it right? Yeah. Ask a question. I just wanted to weigh in more on the in utero side of things, and you were talking about the increase in testicular cancer going all the way back to the pregnancy, basically. What sort of factors and things are you guys identifying kind of in that realm of research?
So, are you a biologist?
No, I'm a nurse at
nurse,
Hunter
okay.
IVF.
Well, fundamentally, what happens during pregnancy is you get these very primitive primordial germ cells, and during pregnancy they have to differentiate into spermatogonial stem cells, the cell, and they will then just sit there in the testis until puberty, and then they'll start to make sperm. In the pregnancies where testicular cancer arises in the male baby, that transition doesn't occur. So that when you get to puberty, the testis is there, the testis is normal, But instead of having spermatogonial stem cells, you've got these very primitive primordial germ cells. And when the message from the brain comes down to the testis, go forth and multiply, they do, but in a very uncontrolled way. And that's how you get this testicular cancer. What's involved? The Danes have been really active in this area because Denmark, interestingly enough, Denmark has the highest rate of testicular cancer and the lowest sperm counts in the world. Finns have the opposite. They have the highest sperm counts and the lowest incidence of testicular cancer. If a Finn goes and lives in Denmark, he ends up with Danish testicular cancer rates and Danish sperm counts. So it's definitely an environmental thing, not a genetic thing. And the favourite candidate are environmental estrogens. So these are compounds with names like bisphenol and so on. But it's a very rich area in reproductive toxicants. Jacinta was in the newspaper this week, I think, talking about PFAS and other reproductive toxicants having an impact upon us in ways that are not immediately evident, but they can have a very subtle effect on the reproductive system that's maybe not easily detected otherwise.
The Danes, John, I reckon it's that tinned rotten fish.
Oh, yeah.
Is anyone having a look at that
Too
stuff?
much bacon, you reckon?
Oh, it's good. Sweden, how do they go in Sweden?
Oh, they're somewhere between the Danes and the Finns.
Thank you.
I had two questions. One was I wondered if in eutherian mammals the decline in fertility has been seen outside the sort of controlled reproductive processes that go on in our domestic industries. In other words, is the whole environment of the hunter affecting not only human but animals when you go down and look at the spontaneous fertility rates? That was my first question. The second question was, my recollection is that endocrinology embraced andrology, and there's some very eminent endocrinologists like David Handelsman, and I've wondered what has happened to cause the divorce between the IVF program and the endocrinology, or is that just a figment of my imagination?
Yeah, no. Let's address that question first, then we go back to the domestic animals. So the major issue with endocrinology is that male infertility, by and large, is not an endocrine problem. Most men are normoandrogenic. They have normal testosterone levels. And so there isn't an obvious endocrine cause. There are exceptions, obviously, but by and large, the kind of subtle defects in semen quality that are so common in the samples that Andrew would see are not correlated with low testosterone levels. Okay, they're testicularly normal. They're not unlike female infertility, which is often endocrine in basis.
I have a personal story about that.
Oh.
My brother has gone out of had problems because of lack of
Pituitary, yeah. Well, it is becoming increasingly common because the most common genetic disease in our species is hemochromatosis, which is very common. And long-term hemochromatosis can lead to a decline in testosterone levels. Anyway, that's that one. And then the domestic animal one is really fascinating. So yes, some domestic animals, and the ones that we work on often are horses and dairy cattle. They have a major fertility problem. And the reason they have a major fertility problem is that they are domestic animals and they were selected for some other property. Their athletic prowess in the case of a thoroughbred stallion, or their milk yield in the case of a dairy cow. And when you select for one thing and you don't select for fertility, you lose it. And one of the interesting things about our species is we are now no longer selecting for fertility. When we were in primeval state, the average woman would have had 7 children, and she had 7 children because 5 of them were going to die. In modern society, happily, there is very little neonatal mortality. Children don't die. So there's no point in having 7 children, you can just have 1, and it will survive. So you no longer select for those high fertility genes. So it is inevitable that modern society, with its low infant mortality rates, will lead to a decline in human fertility.
And it's not environmental.
No, so then on top of that, so you've got a lack of selection pressure, which is one thing, and then you've got all these environmental toxicants that we've been talking about is another thing. So these are all compounding together to have an impact on human fertility.
I think, Zamira, you've got some more from the Slido.
I do, yes. There are a couple more here. So this is a nice question from the audience. It's, from each of you, what is the one message I can go home and tell the men in my life about fertility and infertility?
Excellent question.
I think the major message for me anyway would be, there is no shame in this. It's just a disease like any other disease. So if you think you have a fertility problem, go and see your doctor and get a proper diagnosis. Not something to be concerned about or ashamed about, just acknowledge it and deal with it.
And I think I probably would say don't take fertility for granted. As a couple, think about your family planning, reproductive choices just as much as you do planning to have a mortgage and a house and everything else, because time is important as a couple, because it's probably the one thing that we can't fix, if for the woman. And also think about male preconception health just as much as you do female preconception health. That's one that we never talk about. That women often go to their GP and get some preconception advice, but men won't even turn up if they've got a fertility problem, let alone getting preconception advice.
And I think what we saw is that it takes 70-something days to make a sperm cell. So, yeah, all of the things that you're exposed to during that time are going to have an effect.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely everything. I mean, I've sort of said it, but knowledge is power, and it's the easiest thing a guy can do. And the earlier you can get onto it, the better. And the more you know, the better, and the easier it is to sort of digest. And interestingly, Dr. Hedges saying about having to pre-plan it as well, because you sort of are then faced with those decisions where it is almost like getting a mortgage. It is almost like looking ahead, and the older you get, the harder it gets. So you need to have these conversations now and early, and there is no stigma attached to it, especially from the guy's perspective as well.
Yeah, we still have more questions. So the next question is, it's difficult for men to find a urologist in Newcastle, and we were surprised to learn that fertility is considered a special interest for urologists. So I suppose that's not really a question, it's a statement. But did you want to speak to that? That it's considered a special interest as opposed to something that they would routinely be...
Urology. Yeah, so interestingly enough, I'm going to go to Brazil in a couple of weeks' time to the 40th Brazilian Congress of Urology. There will be about 10,000 people there. It's an enormous field because they embrace both the things that we normally associate urology with, which is prostatic cancer and kidney disease and so on. But they also embrace infertility as part of their portfolio. But that's not true of urologists generally. And in this country, as I've said, it's usually the obstetricians and gynecologists who deal with infertility. Unless you've got a varicocele, which is a very particular cause of infertility due to basically a varicose vein associated with your testes, then you might go and consult a urologist. But otherwise, it's mostly obstetricians and gynecologists. It's not.
Yeah, look, I get referrals from urologists because they don't deal with male fertility. I mean, they do deal with varicocele, is where you get a dilated veins around the testicle, and it just produces some increased heat, and that can reduce sperm production. In fact, I think most of the urologists in Newcastle don't do vasectomy reversals. They do vasectomies, but most of them will not deal with male fertility, and they'll send them on. Now there are exceptions to that, and in our group in IVF Australia we have a woman who, that's her whole bent is fertility urology, and she does the sort of extended, what we call microdissections, extended sperm searches to find little islands of sperm scattered amongst this whole testicle, and spend two or three hours with a microscope in theatre and the andrology team looking at each little sample. But they're so...
That was the sound of someone just finding a sperm.
Yeah. Look, that's what it's like.
Woo!
We got one.
And but we have one of those, so it's a very, very specialised area.
Rich?
Thanks for being here, Nick. This one's for you. Your fertility journey is a bit unconventional.
Yep.
Can you sort of explain to us how long it took you through going through your journey of fertility, and did you go straight into trying to have a child, or did you have a bit of a break there? And then Andrew, I guess, what is more of a conventional journey for couples, and what's like the average time spent trying to get pregnant?
Yeah, I think ours was 2 years in total from finding out about my issue and then to having our child, who's now 6 months old. And interestingly, that what we were just touching on before with you saying that you do need to decide, that's where my wife and I had to decide if we were going to start, because we weren't trying for kids at this time. We did it for the radio, and then we were thrusted into it, and then found out I had problems, so got her tested, found out she had problems, and it was like, we both got issues, like, this may never happen, or it might be a 10-year journey, let's just jump on this thing right now, but we weren't ready to jump on it as well, which is a very unique situation, and that's what we had to have the chats with Dr. Hedges about it and plan that out. And we did as much testing and as many things as we could, and I froze as much sperm as I could. And we got ourselves to a place where we were ready to start the actual cycle of IVF, and then we had to have a break. And we went overseas and had a sort of a bit of a trip and had a couple of months off, and just said see it in the new year and start in January and see how it goes there, coming back fresh, because you sort of do need to... you do need to take some time, and it's a very long process, and there's so many obstacles in the way that, yeah, a break is important. But ours was about 2 years, I think, from start to finish.
Yeah, I mean, you were fortunate you had some embryos frozen.
Yes.
Normal.
Yep.
And so was then a choice of when to use them?
Yeah, we were lucky, yeah. We got 7 embryos, I think, which is also, rare, and our first one failed, and then we got our daughter from the second, so we have 5 in the fridge. So now we're in this even more rare position where it's, when we're ready, knock on the door, go to the freezer, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's a unique sort of situation to be in.
And I think that's quite atypical. Because there's almost 2 different routes there. So one is for someone who has an extremely low count. So normally a couple would have been trying for 6 months maybe, and then they might have seen their GP, they might have done some basic investigations, who knows. The guy probably wouldn't have got round to doing a sperm count for another 3 months, or if you're lucky. And then if it was an ultra low count like yours, they would have been referred immediately, and then we would have sort of gone down that path. If it was just Morgan, for example, that journey probably would have looked like difficulty falling pregnant and then miscarrying,
Yeah.
And that probably would have taken longer, because there might have been some pregnancies. It might have been a year, and then there might have been, if you're lucky, you do the chromosomal test up front, you find out there's this translocation, so translocation is where you get a piece of genetic material from one chromosome sort of exchanged with another one, so they're rearranged in such a way that when you make sperm or eggs, you end up with an unbalanced number of chromosomes, and that translates into either not getting pregnant or miscarrying, or if you're lucky, the same balanced translocation or whatever. So that's a different journey. That might have taken a little bit longer. But so yeah, it's unusual. In many ways, you're very lucky.
Like, best case of a bad situation. But doesn't it go back to what we're speaking about knowledge is power? I know not everyone's going to go on the radio and get their sperm checked and find out that way and stuff, but just going and getting checked straight away as a guy it can make the process so much easier.
And you can imagine that if that journey started when Morgan was 39, then all of a sudden she's starting to do, the problems worked out, starting to do IVF, all of a sudden she's 40, so we know that chances are probably approaching half of what they would have been when she was below 35.
Samira?
Yes, so there's another question here that I think really arises from this, from what Nathan was talking about with the, infertility diagnosis being an early check engine light for the rest of the body and the system. So someone is asking, what is access like for men to be tested for infertility without a diagnosis of infertility? So if you're a young man and you are keen to get your fertility checked as an indication of overall body health, is that something that's accessible, and is there a Medicare rebate available for that?
There is a Medicare rebate for semen analysis, but you need a referral for that but it could be from your GP. So yeah, the access is actually pretty good. There are semen analysis and sperm counts and sperm counts. So If you go to a general pathology lab, you'll get a fairly basic sperm count, and if you go to a fertility lab, you'll get a slightly more detailed one, well, a much more detailed one. But yeah, the access is actually not that bad.
All right. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Or you're all ready for finish off the bruschetta up the back and ask some questions of our wonderful guests? Thank you so much for being here and coming along and supporting the team. I think what I might actually hand back to you just for a moment, John Schjenken, about what we've heard from our panel tonight and the importance of this research happening here with your team at HMRI in the Hunter Valley, because we do face funding challenges, they're constant, but it's so incredibly important that we get the research done and we're able to continue to do it here when we look at things like, is it Felix? Yeah, Felix and Sperm Safe, you know, that's all research that's happening here, which is fantastic. John?
Thanks, Carol. I wasn't prepared for this.
No, I know you weren't.
I was worried when you handed me the mic. Look, it's just, well, thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time to come along today. It's absolutely amazing, and for everyone in the audience as well. It's, I think, really important, and everyone's really exemplified this, and, you know, knowledge is power. I think, Nick, you really, I think that's such a perfect way to say it, and, you know, raising this awareness and talking about things, because as Carol said, you know, Felix is the perfect example. I remember I did my very early undergraduate days in the lab in 2004, I think it was, and I remember a PhD student sitting in the lab working on a very early version of that
Look
device.
at that proud old prof over there.
And, you know, the I guess the time that it takes from a fundamental discovery to actually making a clinical impact isn't a year, 2 years. It takes an awful long time. And
the chestnut that we use is an average of 17 years from great idea to the patient. Yeah.
So it's, yeah, incredibly long period of time, and I guess that's why it's so important to not only have that translational impact, and that's incredibly important, and so to have that constant pipeline going on from that discovery science to that translation to make impact, because the discovery that someone may have made in the lab today could be something incredibly important in 20 years' time. And it could be something completely out of the field that we're working on, or discoveries from, you know, serendipitous discovery. So I think, you know, for all of us in the audience now, if we can talk more about it, if we can share our knowledge and actually raise more awareness of how prevalent this is and the challenges that people that are suffering from infertility face, I think that's probably the best thing that can come out of today.
Indeed. John Schjenken, thank you very much. Dr. Andrew Hedges, thank you. Ducko, thank you. And please give Florence a little squeeze for me when you get home. And Professor John Aitken, there's just one issue that I have before I let you all go, and I will, again, thank you so much for coming along and joining us. 96, the Indian guy. Do you reckon it's his?
Well, he said it was.
I'm not sure if I believe that. Thank you so much for coming along. We've got some snacks up the back, but thank you so much for being here and joining us tonight. If you would like to know any more about the research program, about Hunter Medical Research Institute, Hunter IVF, then make sure that you get in touch with any of the crew here tonight. Have a chat before you leave. Thank you for being here.